Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. What we're going to do today is we're going to finish up the 100 Years' War. So we just do class periods. It took them 100 years. 100 Years' War, Joan of Arc, Pope Boniface VIII and all his problems. The Unam Sanctum, the Avignon Papacy, the Great Schism, Conciliarism, the Council of Pisa, the Council of Constance, and the War of the Roses. Has nothing to do with flowers. Alright. In the last exciting episode, we killed off Henry V. King from 1413 to 1422. And followed by his son, Henry VI. Actually, he's 9 months old when he comes to the throne. But again, that's the problem you have when you have a system that's based on oldest surviving son inherits everything. No matter how old, the oldest surviving one gets it. In this case, 9 months old. So can't even walk yet, can barely crawl. It probably says things more intelligible than most modern politicians, but still completely incapable of making decisions about the country. So our regency is declared. Henry V's ministers basically make all the decisions in the king's name. Henry VI, as he grows up, learns the ropes and becomes king on his own. But his Charles VI, his grandfather, maternal grandfather, he died in 1422 as well. And meanwhile, King Henry's government is fighting the government of his uncle, Charles VII. And so one of Charles VI's sons, who becomes king, the Armagnacs put him on the throne. And so carrying out a treaty with the England. I thought they could take on England at this point. It's going to ruling about the same time. But remember, Charles VI was mentally ill. Something biologically ingrained. I'm not quite sure what it was, but Charles VII was a very weak, very timid man. Jumpy. I'd probably say a little neurotic. But easily manipulable, like Charles VI was. So that's why the Duke of Orleans and his allies want him on the throne. England, like I said, England's there to take over and to run things their way. And the Duke of Orleans and his allies, the Armagnacs, don't want that. Charles is unable to rally the French people around him. Henry unable to rally the English people around him. But the Burgundians, the Duke of Burgundy and his allies, the nobles allied to him in France, they are staying with him. But he's mostly in charge of what's going on north of France's Point. And the English trying to encourage the Burgundians along. But even after Henry V's death, the English are still doing very well. But onto the scene, 1429, emerges Joan of Arc. Joan was 17 years old, claimed to be inspired by God. She received these visions that she would hear these bells, and then the angels would speak to her and tell her that she is destined to lead France to victory. It is God's will that she defeat the English, expel them from France. Now, hearing bells or music, then hearing voices, today that would be described as schizophrenia. But Joan is convinced of these visions. She goes to Charles VII, begs to accompany the army up to Orleans, the city where the English are besieging the French, threatening to overrun them. You can see here on page 318. Painting of Joan of Arc on 319. Of course, Charles isn't really sure what to make of Joan. She seems very sincere. She wants to go fight, help France. Well, okay. But the thing is, though, women aren't allowed the military at this point, and most of the women in military camps, well, delicately, they aren't exactly the type to bring home to mama. Working girls. Okay. But, Joan seemed nice enough, was on the French side and wanted to help them out. Okay. Well, Joan goes to Orleans, sees the French struggling against the English, gets angry at the sight of the French forces losing, because the French are getting a good fight, but they're outgeneraled. So Joan picks up a sword and starts fighting the English. Hand-to-hand combat against these hardened old English veterans. And she's doing pretty well. This farm girl, never had any kind of formal military training, but she's holding her own. The other French soldiers see this sight, thinking, this girl is beating the English, and we're not. So that inspires them. They start rallying, and start hacking back and forth, and the French repel the English at Orleans. Next, they praising Joan for her efforts, her bravery, and she tells them all about her visions, that God has told her that they will defeat the English, to follow her, and they'll lead them to victory. They're excited, so they're following her, but she's kind of their mascot in a way, kind of their good luck charm. This has kind of turned the tide of the war now. They're excited now. They think they can beat the English. And this girl's telling them God's on their side. Well, if they're wedded, who are they to question that? So this is a holy crusade against the English. They've been at war off and on for 4 centuries. So slowly the war starts turning. Joan leads them off to several more victories. But in 1430, though, the year after all this begins, Joan is captured by the Burgundians. And this is the young girl who has been causing them all these, the Burgundians and the English, all these problems for all this time. Well, not quite sure what to do with her, so they turn over to the English. The English aren't sure what to do with her either. There's no real protocol in this case. But all along the way, Joan keeps talking about her visions, that God has determined that the French will prevail, that God will lead France to victory. So, the English aren't sure what to do with it either. They turn her over to the Inquisition, the church court. So these priests are listening to Joan with the Inquisition. And she tells them about all these visions she's received, but while she seems sincere, they are not impressed. That God revealed Himself to this lowly peasant girl. Tell them that she's going to upset the existing political order of Europe. Blasphemy. God would not reveal Himself in this way, no. So they thought she was a witch, blasphemer. So the church places her on trial. Of course, they had a couple of priests along the way urging her to recant. Just say you don't believe it. Say it was all a lie. Say you made it all up. And she says, no. The truth is from God. She holds out to the very end. Church court condemns her, burns her at the stake in 1431. 19 years old. Now, executed for witchcraft, I believe that they must do this to save her soul. There's a child burned at the stake. 1456, 3 years after the war was over, a new church court retries the case, looks it over everything, and this time exonerates her. Said, no, Joan was innocent all along.
But she's dead.
Yeah. Oops. And always the problem they point out with the death penalty. What if they turns out it's, it wasn't true? Well, she's innocent, but still a great hero to the people of France. And she's canonized by the Roman Catholic Church in 1920. Right? Saint Joan of Arc. But basically she'd set in motion, though, the reversal of fortune for the English. Where the English dominated most of France, seemed to be about to finish them off. Now the English are on the ropes. Losses in battle, losses of land and treaties and so forth. English keep losing steadily more and more and more. And mostly all under Henry VI. By the time he comes to the throne, the English are losing badly, and he's just not the military man his father was. In fact, he's more like his grandfather. Sad for him and Grandpa Charles both. And so by 1453, after all these years, decades, generations of English blood being spilled to seize the English claim to the throne, the English claim to the French throne, English controls were reduced simply to the tiny port in the city of Calais. So they're the closest point between France and England, the northern coast. That's all they have left in 1453. The end of the 100 Years' War, England loses. They're reduced just to that tiny toehold on the continent that they're going to lose not long afterward. And there are going to be serious repercussions in England because of that. Well, the 14th century is a time of tremendous instability because of the fallout from the plague. By the mid-15th century, most monarchs were not direct descendants of those kings of 1300. You have a lot of factionalism. England, 3 princes that are trying to claim control of the Holy Roman Empire. You have the shift in military tactics, shifts going from troops supported by local nobles to professional troops and mercenaries under the direct command of the king. But reliance on mercenaries for so many governments is causing a lot of financial problems. Yeah, these guys will fight for you, but it's going to cost you a lot. A lot more than having your own army to it. Causing changes in government. For example, Edward III. This whole thing starts. King of England from 1327 to 77. Again, the war was very expensive, so they had to raise taxes higher and higher, causing a strain on the English economy. What's he have to do is he has to go to his advisors, Parliament. They had to go to Parliament more and more often to try to solve these financial problems. So what ends up happening is this body of advisors, Parliament, ends up taking control of taxation policy for England. Parliament was transformed simply from an advisory body to the law-making body of England, particularly dealing with taxes. As tax laws expand, the reach of taxation expands, regulation over businesses regarding taxation expands, Parliament's authority has expanded further, eventually to making all laws in England. king's power politically in England is reduced steadily more and more and more. To the point today, all you have in England is just basically a figurehead. The job of the Queen is basically is to wave crowds in court parades and attend the opening of shopping centers. That's it. So his son, Richard II, deeply unpopular, still having problems with taxes when he imposes the poll tax. This leads to more problems in the nobility and people. He's nearly overthrown in the Wat Tyler's Rebellion. He is overthrown in 1399 by Henry IV. It's a Shakespeare play about Henry IV. He lived too long himself. That's what ends up happening, though, because of the death of Richard II, as unpopular as he was among peasants and nobility alike, is this opens a lot of factionalism within England. Basically, one group of the family overthrows another group, so it's total chaos. Every man for himself at this point. France is depopulated, devastated by the 100 Years' War. Factions arise within France. Civil war in France. Basically, that's a good portion of what the 100 Years' War is. They get down to the Burgundians versus the Armagnacs. And you have uprisings and peasant rebellions and civil wars elsewhere as well. And also now issues within the church. This is simmering for a while in the late Middle Ages. Just coming down to this man here, Boniface VIII, and King Philip IV of France, Philip the Fair. Philip is king from 1285 to 1314. Philip's got problems, money problems. He needs cash. They don't have a lottery. They can't play that. He's already started marrying as many fortunes in France and Europe as he could, but needs money. In fact, it's one reason why he establishes the Estates General in 1302 is money, taxation issues. Same reason Edward making Parliament the tax-making body in England. Money. So how are you going to raise taxes? How are you going to support the country's finances and needs? And you do it in a way that's not going to spark a revolution. Nice, fair way that everyone can agree to. Or at least not mine so much. Well, Philip is looking for cash. Then he realizes something. The largest landholder in France is the Roman Catholic Church. You got these huge cathedrals, beautiful buildings, land surrounding it, untaxed. Lots of monasteries in France. You got the main monastic buildings, but also have these huge lands outside of it. The monks used to farm in common to support the monastery, but also letting the peasants farm on it for their own purposes as well, so that peasants can have food, untaxed. What does he know? Makes a statement saying that France has the right to tax these lands. Starts investigating policies to begin taxing church lands. Boniface VIII jumps in and says, no, these are church lands, you cannot tax them. They're free from taxation. Church matters are superior to temporal matters and shall not be subject to taxation. That is, God made men kings, and therefore the church should not have to answer to these kings. So, find your money somewhere else. This sparks a huge debate between Boniface and Philip, turned into this roaring argument between the two over Does the church have the right to tax? Does these church lands need to be taxed or not? Does will Philip be able to get his revenue by taxing church lands, or are these sacred lands above taxation? The holy sites must not be taxed. So it's coming down to a question of who has the authority here, the king or the pope? Boniface VIII does mention, yes, you could tax church lands if I gave you permission, but I'm not giving it. So in 1302, Pope Boniface issues a statement called the Unam Saint Latin. Basically, it's a statement on the supremacy of popes over kings. That is, the church and the papacy gave kings their authority, therefore kings must answer to the church. Pope's power is superior to the king's because God is superior to man. Well, the Pope hopes this is the last word, this edict from the church. Philip IV says, no. I still have the right to tax these lands, and I'm going to do it. I'm ignoring you. The Pope excommunicates the king, kicks him out of the church. Excommunication, of course, means removing all the protections and all the acts the church did for the king. Includes baptism, sacrament of marriage, Holy Communion, and of course, the church granting the title of king to Philip IV. Everything's been taken away. So hoping that'll shut him up. Some kings it would. Not Philip IV. Philip had enough power, enough influence. He had enough pull, enough people. He had enough dirt on people, blackmail, bribe money laying around, authority and power, fear and terror, that he could hold everybody in France in line. Not something a lot of other European rulers had. That to an extent, but not the extent Philip had it.
So how do you?
But just all sorts of ways. Ways you probably really don't want to know about. But Philip, for whatever reason, he had it. And so once the Pope excommunicates him, he decides that's a declaration of war on France. Yeah.
Was he the one that got, trying to take over the Knights Templar? Arrested all of them, burned the United States?
I want to say yes, that sounds right. It's the right time period, but don't hold me to that. But the Knights Templar, yeah, they got in a lot of trouble with a lot of kings. Philip IV decides to settle this argument once and for all, that he's going to take his army from France to Rome and arrest the Pope and bring him to France for trial. And Pope Boniface understood what that meant. He can be brought to France, tried, and executed. I remember a thing about popes here in the Middle Ages is, yes, they're priests, they're men of God, but they're politicians too. Not always the kindly, grandfatherly ministry you might think of on Sunday morning. Well, Philip sends his force in, they capture Boniface VIII to bring him back to France, but word is spreading all over Italy that one of their own, the Pope, an Italian, has been captured by the French, these outsiders. Their church is being attacked. So the people rose up. They found where the party that was escorting Boniface to France, surrounded them, demanded these soldiers free the Pope. In the meantime, a couple of nobles get involved. They send some of their men in. They quickly capture Boniface VIII, rescuing him, bring him back to Rome in safety. It was a quick operation, successful, but it was too much for Boniface. Dies shortly afterward of a heart attack. So they say. Timing was very suspicious. Well, they have called election for a new pope. And that is going to be Benedict XI. Pope from 1303 to 1304. Now, this whole issue of France is still going on, and Benedict is hoping to negotiate some kind of compromise with Philip. Maybe there's some way they can settle this issue once and for all. But his gestures go for nothing, because suddenly, 1304, he's dead too. Probably poisoned. Not entirely sure. At this point, Philip IV comes in and demands that the College of Cardinals elect a Frenchman as Pope. Basically, a French cardinal, one that Philip can control, influence. Well, so Clement V is then elected Pope. He'll be Pope from 1305 to 1314. So he's a Frenchman. Now, the Pope, their official position is they are the Bishop of Rome. But the successor of the throne, St. Peter and everything, the Roman Catholic Church is based in Rome. That's not the Vatican City. But Philip demands that the church be moved from Rome to a city a little closer to his influence. Here on page 327. City of Avignon, which is in the Holy Roman Empire, but just across the border from France. Close enough where Philip can check in on everything every so often and lend his support / army whenever needed. So this begins a period known as the Avignon Papacy. Clement V moves the Vatican up to Avignon. So you have a whole series of popes who are residing in Avignon instead of the Vatican. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 popes. Now, of all these 7 popes, 134 cardinals will be created by these popes, 113 of them from France. So the overwhelming majority are going to be from, 85% are going to be from France. And to get to that position, you have to basically you have to know a lot of people. A lot of political connections close to the king. So it strengthens French power within the church. But a lot of people outside of France are saying that these popes at Avignon are simply puppets of the French king. They aren't really true leaders of the church. Many are calling for the Pope to return to Rome. So we get to let's get to Pope Gregory XI. Pope from 1370 to 1378. At this point, a young peasant girl named Catherine of Siena goes to Avignon to see Pope Gregory, and says she has received a vision from God that the church must return from Avignon back to Rome, back to the Vatican. Gregory, touched by her message, agrees to do so. He returns to Rome, and shortly afterward drops dead. Well, how's that for timing? Okay. Well, what happens afterward is, after Gregory dies, the people of Italy are scared that the papacy may be moved back to Avignon. So people of Rome surround the Vatican, the College of Cardinals, where they're voting, demanding an Italian be named Pope. Senate named Archbishop of Bari as Pope Urban VI. But shortly afterward, but 5 months later, a group of dissenting French cardinals stepped forward and said, no, Urban VI is not the legitimate Pope, because the process was contaminated, tainted by this mob surrounding the Vatican. And so they say instead is one of their ranks, another Frenchman, Clement VII, is the real Pope. This causes something called the Great Schism. Schism, which means divide. Now, who's the legitimate Pope? Is it going to be Urban or is it going to be Clement? There's a lot of political power involved here, so the nations here start lining up one side or another. The French and their allies are lining up behind Clement. Everyone is against France, supporting Urban VI. You got the Italians, the Germans, the English, they're lining up behind Urban VI. Scandinavian country lining up behind Urban VI. France, Spain, Scotland, southern Italy supporting Clement VII. Southern Italy is dominated by France, ultimately by France and Spain, so of course they're going to go with Clement. Basically, it's lining up behind the existing political order of Europe. Who's the legitimate Pope? It's a serious question. Well, they both claim that each one is an impostor Pope, called anti-Pope. And they excommunicate each other. But if you don't believe the authority of one of the other one, then that excommunication doesn't mean anything. This goes on for several years here. Each side announcing the other one as the Antichrist, here to destroy God's holy church.
So those two people stay.
Yeah, they both stay in power. They both stay for the rest of their lives. Remember, as Pope, your position is, that is a job for life. And they're staying there as long as they can. But they're both claiming the other one is a fraud, the Antichrist, demon, demonically inspired, possessed. The anti-Pope, the Antichrist are evil.
But there can only be one Pope.
Exactly, it can only be one. They're saying, so Urban's saying, I'm the real Pope. Clement says, no, I'm the real Pope. So you got all of Europe dividing up along these lines, saying, oh no, we think this guy's the real Pope. No one's saying, no, I think this guy's the real Pope.
So I guess now is that another holy war coming or what?
It could be. Could it be a holy war? Could it be a civil war within the Catholic Church? But for the lives of everyday Roman Catholics, this is a serious issue. Because so much of their lives, so many of the most important events of their lives are revolving around the church. Baptism. Is the priest who baptized their baby a real priest? Because if they're ordained by the wrong pope, that means they're not a real priest. That means the baby's not been baptized, something happens and he dies, he's going straight to hell. But which one? Yeah, popes do baptize children sometimes. It happens there so often. But, marriage.
Yeah, your marriage wouldn't be.
Yeah, if it's not a real priest who's married you, you're living in sin. That was a big deal in those days. If your marriage is illegitimate, therefore any inheritances are illegitimate. Therefore, any children you have are illegitimate. You committed a grave sin of adultery.
Okay, so they just stayed in that thing forever and nothing ever came of it until they died?
Yeah, basically these guys stayed until they died, and they hope, and each side hoped when the other one died that this would settle it.
Okay.
They didn't come over to their side, but the faction are saying no. The guy succeeding Urban VI, the guy we're choosing, is the real pope. The other faction says no. The guy succeeding Clement VII is the real pope. This goes on for 40 years.
So who died first? Or did
Urban
you-
VI.
Okay.
Actually, it's an even worse issue because last rites. Catholics believe that before you die, a priest has to give you last rites. That is, remove any last sin around you so you get a clear shot straight into heaven. If not, you be tainted with sin, sent to purgatory or hell.
Do they still do that today?
Oh, still do. So they pull out the rosary beads and start praying the rosary and ask for forgiveness of sins and send the body up into
So
the
this
spirit of
is-
the afterlife.
This is after your death, or
Usually before,
Before.
but they can do it afterward if it's very quickly afterward.
okay.
But if it's the wrong priest, illegitimate priest,
Then
you're going to burn.
Oh.
These are very serious issues here. Life and death
I bet
issues.
those people were so confused.
They were. But of course, who's going to listen to the average man in 1400? Nobody. So eventually the issue's so bad that the idea of conciliarism comes up. That members of the different factions decide, look, we have to settle this issue once and for all. This is tearing up the church, it's tearing up all of Europe. Our people are confused, we're losing legitimacy in the church. So let's have the series of councils sit down here, both sides sitting together, and try to talk it out. Try to come up with a solution. Basically, instead of trying to overpower each other, turn the other cheek. Settle differences with your neighbor.
Okay.
I think they read that somewhere in the New Testament.
I have one more question.
I got one more
Okay.
answer.
The popes, don't they, in this time period, didn't they stay in the church?
Oh yeah, they run the head of the church.
Okay.
Does it mean they stay within the church building?
Oh, yeah, didn't they live in the church? or something like that?
Basically, a church complex. The Vatican and the papal headquarters of Avignon, basically, it's part of a large complex. They do have a cathedral, sanctuary area, or they do conduct conduct masses and everything. But they also have the papal apartments, basically this huge mansion kind of area.
Okay, so
where
my
Pope lives and
question
works.
is, so both of these men were living in the same area?
No, he's in Avignon.
Okay,
He's
that's,
in Rome.
that's why I was confused. Okay,
Yeah,
I got it
it's-
now.
It's not an odd couple kind of thing.
Okay, I got it. I was
Yeah,
just
one neat freak pope and one slovenly pope.
Okay.
So the church was, fine, let's say for these 40 years, where they just have two different ideologies within the same church.
Basically, the ideology stayed the same. Just the only real difference is who should be in charge. Yeah, these are ideologies that have been in place for centuries at this point. Maybe some slight difference in management style, but basically, day-to-day operations of the church. The church has most important functions. Baptism, funerals, weddings, feast days, saints, canonizations, that was still all the same. All the sacraments were the same. Alright. And so increasingly, a lot of these church leaders saying through conciliarism that church council should settle these issues, not the Pope. The church, so the Pope being supreme leader, ruler, that church factions sit down and try to solve these issues. It's councils. So the first of these major church councils is the Council of Pisa in 1409. What they decided to do to end the Great Schism is they're going to get rid of both these popes. They propose two popes and elect a third. Brand new pope, we're starting over, schism is over. Problem. The existing two popes refuse to recognize the Council of Pisa. They refuse to step down, so they are ordained by God to be pope, and this little council is not pushing them out of the way. So now for a while you have three popes. Okay, the new guy steps down, but still got the problem. So the Holy Roman Emperor at this point Emperor Sigismund calls for a new council. This one is the Council of Constance. There's several major sessions between 1414 and 1418. Meeting there in Switzerland near Lake Constance. It's a very nice site, very pretty scenery. They have three objectives of the Council of Constance. One, end the Great Schism. Bring the church back together once and for all. Two, eradicate heresy. There's the problem over these last few years, all these problems of the papacy, who should control it, the Great Schism. A lot of heretics rising. A lot of people questioning church policy, church functions. A lot of people saying the church should go entirely different directions with its doctrine and theology. What's happening with one guy, John Huss from Bohemia, he's speaking out against the church. Council of Constance invited him to come speak about his issues, and John Huss was burned at the stake. It's one way to eradicate heresy, but a little too rough. Third objective, reform the church. Get rid of all the problems of corruption within the church. So all these married priests that are secretly married or have mistresses on the side, about 5 or 6 kids, that's not supposed to be happening. So try to get rid of that problem. Try to get rid of all these problems of these crooked priests stealing money from the poor box and living lavishly off the donations of the people. Because, there are good priests in the church here this time. But it's a large organization with a lot of money and a lot of power. People with less than godly ambitions are attracted to that, corrupted by that, giving the church a bad name in the process. The church says, our focus must be on God, the church. We got to get rid of these people who are trying to tear it down, trying to enrich themselves off our work. So, as for the 3 popes, they are resigned or deposed, basically kicked off the throne willingly or otherwise. They end the Great Schism, electing a new pope, Martin V, Italian from Rome. He's the pope, and he'll be the pope for the rest of his life, 1417, 1431. No more anti-popes, just him. The Great Schism is ended. But the problem of heresy and reform, though, there's going to be a lot of problems in the coming years. They can't quite silence all their critics. They can't quite convince critics and heretics that the church is right, and there's only one church, and they're it. Can't quite convince a lot of people on their own of making up their own minds. The church says that they should have the only power to determine doctrine. Church reforms, all these people are too well hidden, too well fortified politically and otherwise to be able to be dislodged. That's going to be a problem for a while. So this is also a time of a change in literature. In the Middle Ages, you don't have a lot of great literature coming. You don't have a lot of much anything coming out of the Middle Ages. It's a period of relative intellectual stagnation. Not a lot of advances in technology, not a lot of advances intellectually, just stagnation. It only really starts ending towards the end of the Middle Ages when you start having the rediscovery of all this knowledge from the Greeks and the Romans. People start studying math and science in much more careful detail. Literature, so there's not a lot, but you do have some interesting characters coming out of this time period. Like I said, we talked about Giovanni da Boccaccio with the Decameron, 1353. In Italy, you do have a few poets here and there, a few writers, but not a lot. You have a few folk stories emerging and disseminating. Not a lot. Boccaccio is really one of the big ones. But what we're seeing in the 14th century, though, is vernacular literature is becoming increasingly popular. People moving away just from biblically based stories, religious stories. And a lot of great works are starting to emerge in the 14th century to inspire the writers of the 15th century and beyond, going into the Renaissance. Basically, the stagnation of imagination and intellect in the Middle Ages, it's starting to break down in the 14th century. You have Dante. Okay, Gary commonly just called Dante. In his blockbuster trilogy, The Divine Comedy. It really isn't all that funny, but written 3 books written between 1313 and 1321. Dante himself lived from 1265 to 1321. His Divine Comedy was 3 tales, journeys through heaven, hell, and purgatory. Basically, from that order, starting from the bottom, going to the top. Basically, it is starts out as a dream, and he's guided by the Roman poet Virgil. He's guided through these places, just basically to say, what exactly is going on here? Of course, give them Latin names: Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. And really, are images of heaven and hell in popular culture really are determined a lot by Dante's visions of it. Our work, so forth, afterward. Hell in Dante's mind was divided into 8 circles of hell. Basically, people would go to these different levels of hell depending on their sins in life. In some places, hell is a frozen wasteland for some, burning pit of fire for others. But in any level of hell, it is constant pain and torment. And at the bottom of hell, the very pit of hell, is the devil, and he is forever forever chewing on the 2 worst traitors in all of history: Judas Iscariot, the disciple who betrayed Christ for the crucifixion, and Marcus Brutus, who betrayed Julius Caesar.
Did you say chewing?
Chewing on them. Yeah. It's in his mouth, chewing on them forever. That's hell. Constant pain, no escape. And that's the image a lot of people have of hell, is, like I said, this pit of fire. It's swarms of demons tormenting people. People being punished based on different punishments based on different sins. Well, they say that one movie, Hell's Repetition. Purgatory. Roman Catholics believe that there's kind of a middle ground between the two. Purgatory, you're not quite good enough for heaven yet, so you go to this place where your sins are kind of burned off, depending on how good or bad you were in life. The idea of limbo, kind of this neutral ground between heaven and hell, but purgatory is a little different. Second volume. Third volume is heaven. Except in the clouds, the idea of St. Peter at the pearly gates, of Dante. You can say heaven, this, of course, Dante is finishing his last volume on heaven in the last years. Basically a place of joy, free of pain, peace for all eternity. It's a huge best-selling book, very popular in the 14th century. Like I say, really influences the artwork and future works on discuss any of the heaven, hell, or purgatory. We have Geoffrey Chaucer, English writer. Lived from 1340 to 1400. His big book was The Canterbury Tales. Finished in the 1390s. It's similar to Decameron. It's basically it's a collection of stories wound around a common narrative. This case, it's these 29 pilgrims traveling to Canterbury to visit the shrine there. And on this way, on this pilgrimage, they basically telling stories to pass the time in. And in this, you see a cross-section of 14th century English society. Law enforcement officer who was the reeve. You have a cook, you have a knight, among many others. They're telling various different tales. The knight telling the story of bravery and courage, a couple of religious tales. You have a couple of tales that are somewhat obscene, but and that's 14th century England. But the interesting thing about Geoffrey Chaucer was he is the last major writer to be writing in Middle English. It's the transition period between Middle English and Modern English. The thing about Middle English is it was spelled phonetically, and you pronounced every letter, even the ones that would be silent today. But the syntax, the sentence structure is still basically the same. The English language is in the transition from its Danish and German roots to something that's less Danish and German, more English, eventually becoming modern English. Interestingly enough, what's going to happen here with the English language is got all these isolated areas with these very different dialects, and sometime in the 1500s, you're going to have this massive, what we call a dialectic shift. They suddenly start speaking a more common language. And English language suddenly starts becoming more recognizable. But in the 1500s, the English language that you see is the language of William Shakespeare, King James Bible, and so forth. So the these, the thous, thou shouts, and whatnot, that's the kind of language that's being spoken at the time. The language is changing very quickly. That by the time the King James Bible is written in the early 1600s, the kind of speech that's being used to write that version of the Bible is outdated, old-fashioned. People aren't speaking like that anymore. That short time, just a couple of generations. And then think how different the English language is in the 1700s. Just a couple hundred short years, the English language goes from being something that would be very difficult for people in the 21st century to recognize, to suddenly recognizable language in a very short time period. All these massive changes take place within English culture and the English language itself. So, culture is changing our words, changing our ideas, changing how we think, see, and imagine. And Chaucer was one of the forces kind of behind that. By publishing his tales like this, people enjoyed them. Got more people writing, thinking, and more people communicating. So a shift in the language is occurring. But in the meantime, though, there's serious problems here within English monarchy. We get to the War of the Roses. So, keep this hand out handy. Like I said, the royal families of Europe, they are all intermarried, intermixed, intertwined. And the War of the Roses, a devastating civil war among factions in the English royal family, consumed the nation between 1455 and 1485. Years of unrest and instability transformed the politics of England from a thing once promising power to a chaotic state on the brink of disaster by the end of it. Now, why the rose? Well, the royal crests here, the crest symbols of the family, you have these different roses on them, one different color. What you have here is, these guys here are the Plantagenets. The royal family that ruled England for a good portion of the High Middle Ages. Edward III was a Plantagenet. Richard II was a Plantagenet. Of course, they had a lot of cousins and people in the royal family who did rise to the throne, but kind of locked out of it. But Edward has two other sons. One is John of Gaunt, the first Duke of Lancaster. So the Lancasters, they had the symbol of the family crest was a red rose. And Edmund of Langley, the other one, the first Duke of York, the House of York had the white rose. So they're carrying these crests into battle, and so it comes they're going to battle against each other. So the white rose against the red rose, the War of the Roses. Now, you got these guys here, the Lancasters. You ever seen the show Game of Thrones? Except a lot of those kind of based on the War of the Roses and some of these civil wars among the different competing factions for the throne. Well, Henry V, like I said, he dies. Other popes here. Henry V dies in 1422. And he leaves on the throne his son Henry VI. Here's the problem. Henry VI, like his grandfather, has a lot of mental problems. Inherited, genetic. So while he's ordinarily a good and decent person, he had a lot of the issues with judgment, a lot of issues discerning reality from fantasy. Basically, a man who's just really just not fit to be king. Makes sense. A lot of problems. Basically, one of the real definitions of people with mental health issues is they cannot make decisions in their own best interest. Henry VI is very weak. Except that he's also very loyal to people he thinks are his friends, but has troubles figuring out who's actually the right man for the job. He's easily swayed, easily influenced. Doesn't handle stress well. Well, once Joan of Arc came on the scene, his regents proved to be unable to stop the loss of lands in France. And in 1445, now at the age of 24, he married the niece of Charles VII, Margaret of Anjou, which is also his cousin. They do that a lot. And yes, they have problems because of that. Well, Charles VII agrees to the marriage, as Henry is completely in love with Margaret. Charles says that on the condition instead of a dowry, instead of a money payment from Henry to Charles, Henry would cede the English-held provinces of Maine and Anjou back to Charles. Henry completely loved Greece to a secret treaty, giving up two huge provinces that might have been able to stave off the loss of increasing losses in the English losses in France. They find out, the other nobles in England find out what happened, they are enraged. This has been given up and handed away. But Henry's problems just keep going on. pious, he's generous, he's kind, but he's ineffective, has bouts of insanity. Surrounded himself with unpopular advisors, faced increasingly restless populace angry with increasing corruption, loss of lands and friends, and the kingdom's problematic finances. They're fighting a war that's very expensive, and they're losing. So in 1452, Richard, the Duke of York, his cousin, took advantage of the instability, raised an army, and returned from his exile as governor of Ireland. Standoff ended quickly. But in 1453, the 100 Years' War was over in France. English power reduced just to Calais, and the English people and the nobles are incensed. Well, in 1455, 2 years after this, war broke out between forces loyal to Henry VI and the House of York. Civil War lasts for 6 years. Well, by 1461, now Edward of York, Richard's son, succeeded in capturing Henry VI. So what happened was, at the battle, Henry has another mental breakdown. He just kind of goes into a catatonic trance and basically starts reciting nursery rhymes over and over again. I'm not aware of what really is going on. So, Edward captures Henry, puts him in the Tower of London. He's not going to execute him. I actually kind of feel sorry for him. But Edward is going to take the throne. So now you have Edward IV as king. King from 1461 to 83, House of York. On the death of his father in 1460, Richard, the Duke of York, Edward inherited his father's titles and claimed the throne. Well, the House of York then allied with the Earl of Warwick and claimed Edward as king in 1461 after the capture of London, after the capture of Henry VI. Lancastrians had been defeated the last stand of the Battle of Towton. But the Earl of Warwick, who's basically playing power broker here, gets tired of Edward and turns on him. His forces defeat the Yorkist army in the Battle of Edgecote Moor in 1469, which allows for Henry VI to be taken from the Tower of London and be restored to full power. They call it the readeption. Put back on the throne. It's in 1469. 1470 is proclaimed king again. Edward is on the ropes, but he pulls his forces together. The Yorkists defeat the Lancastrians in the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471. And this time, instead of simply putting Henry, his cousin, in prison, a nice comfortable room under guard, he has him executed instead. It's not going to deal with Henry anymore. The Lancastrians are gone. They've got the Yorkists. 1475, Edward goes to war with France over their support of Henry VI, forcing the French army to pay an indemnity and an annual pension to Edward, so he basically gets a lot of money off of it. They landed in France with money. But in later years, his health declined. He died in 1483. Some sources suggest he may have been poisoned. That's where you get to the tragedy of Edward V and Richard III. So in 1483, we get to real intrigue in the royal family. And unfortunately, though, we're out of time.